You thought it was just a room, a job, a quiet place to breathe. But then the mirrors blink back, something knocks from inside the walls, and your voice starts coming from somewhere else. These aren't unlucky coincidences. They're true horror stories from people who almost didn't make it out. Welcome to High Scary Stories, where the strange is real. And the real doesn't always let go. Hit subscribe. Stay alert. And whatever you do, don't answer the knocking. Story 1. She told me not to open the closet. I should have listened. She only had one rule. Never open the hallway closet. That was it. No weird curfews. No passive-aggressive notes about dishes in the sink. No overly friendly energy that made your skin crawl. Just one simple request: don't touch the closet with the green handle. I remember laughing a little when she first told me, standing in the middle of our new off-campus rental, with that excited, nervous energy you only get when you're starting a new chapter. The house was old, sure, but it had character creaky floorboards, stained glass above the front door, and a weird sunroom full of dead plants we both pretended we'd revive. And there was the closet, wedged at the end of the hallway, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Painted the same beige as the walls, except for the handle, which was a dark forest green, like it had been swapped from another door entirely. When I asked what was inside, she smiled in this quiet, unreadable way and said, "It's just best if it stays closed." Her name was Maddie. She was quiet, artsy, the type who always smelled faintly of incense and acrylic paint. We met in a campus housing Facebook group. She liked poetry and vintage jackets. I liked photography and being left alone. It seemed like a perfect match. But now, months later, I think about that closet every time I walk into a dark room. I think about the smell that started leaking out after midnight. I think about the drawings I found under her bed. But mostly, I think about the moment I opened the door anyway. And I wish more than anything that I hadn't. At first, everything felt normal, even easy. Maddie wasn't the kind of roommate who hovered. She worked at a local art supply store and spent most of her time in her room with headphones on, sketching or watching old movies with the volume low. We had a natural rhythm: silent mornings, separate meals, the occasional glass of wine on the front porch when the weather allowed. She was polite, respectful, and oddly warm in small, fleeting ways. One time I came home from class, drenched from the rain, and she handed me a fresh towel without saying a word. Another night, she knocked softly on my door and left a small watercolor painting outside, just a swirl of deep blues and purples, with my name written in tiny cursive at the bottom. I didn't think much of it. She was an artist. Artists are like that. The closet, though it remained closed, I didn't even try the handle at first. Honestly, I barely noticed it most days. Our house had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and that long hallway that led to her room on the left, mine on the right, and the closet at the very end, like a forgotten punctuation mark. But every once in a while, I'd catch her staring at it when she thought I wasn't looking. Just standing there, perfectly still, eyes slightly glazed. It wasn't dramatic or creepy, not at first. Just strange. A few weeks in, I started to notice other things too. Her room, which used to smell like patchouli and oil paint, started to carry a sour metallic scent that drifted out into the hallway when her door was open. The fridge was stocked with odd ingredients, raw meat sealed in plastic jars of something cloudy and pinkish. Once I found a single feather on the kitchen counter, long, black, oily to the touch. When I asked her about it, she just blinked and said, "Oh, that's for a project." I let it go. Artists are like that, I reminded myself. But something about the way she said it, flat, almost rehearsed, stuck with me. I stopped going into the hallway at night. The whole back half of the house seemed to shift after dark. Colder, heavier, like the air was thicker. Once, while brushing my teeth, I thought I saw a shadow move past the bathroom door. But when I stepped out, the hallway was empty. Maddie's door was closed. The closet was closed. Everything looked exactly as it should. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something behind that green handle was watching, waiting, growing. Things didn't fall apart at all at once. It was slow, so slow that for a while I convinced myself it was just stress or the weird energy of midterms or maybe even seasonal depression. But the signs were there. They started with the sounds. Late at night, sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning, I'd hear something faint coming from the end of the hall. At first, it sounded like scratching, tiny rhythmic, like someone dragging their nails along wood. Then came the whispering. It wasn't clear or even human at first, more like a low murmur, a breath that didn't belong to either of us. The first night I heard it, I sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to catch a word. But it would always stop just as suddenly as it started, leaving behind a silence that felt sharper than any noise. I asked Maddie about it one morning casually over coffee. "Do you ever hear anything weird at night, like animals outside or something?" She looked up from her mug slowly, then smiled. "The house just settles," she said. "Old wood remembers things." That phrase stuck with me. Not the house is old or it creaks. The house remembers. After that, I started noticing things missing from my room. Nothing big and eerie, a sock of photo strip from a photo booth tucked in my journal. I thought I was just misplacing them until I found the photo strip on Maddie's dresser, half buried under a pile of dried lavender and matchbooks. I didn't confront her. I couldn't explain why. I just didn't. Instead, I started locking my door at night. And still the noises got louder. I heard shuffling, sometimes knocking once, what sounded like breathing just outside my door. And always the same smell, the metallic tang like rust and something sour. Then there were the drawings. It started with one I found stuck to the fridge with a magnet. It looked like me, long dark hair, sitting on the couch, eyes wide. But something was off. My mouth was missing. Just a smooth patch of skin where it should have been. I thought it was a mistake until I found another one tucked inside my notebook. This time I was sleeping, drawn from the angle of someone standing in my doorway. My eyes were closed, but the rest of my face was twisted like I was screaming. I didn't know how she'd gotten into my room. The locks worked. I checked them every night. I started leaving a chair wedged under the knob just in case. One night I couldn't sleep. I got up to grab a glass of water, walked softly down the hall. As I passed the closet, I heard a sound. Not scratching this time. A soft giggle, childlike, high-pitched. And then, unmistakably, my name, whispered, drawn out, like a promise. I froze. The doorknob twitched. Just once, then silence. I backed away, didn't breathe, until I was back in my room with the chair shoved tight under the door handle. I didn't sleep. I just sat there listening, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Not until I opened the closet. It happened 3 nights later. I hadn't planned to do it. Honestly, I was still trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was the stress, the isolation, or the fact that I hadn't slept properly in days. But that night, something snapped. I had just gotten home from class, drenched in sweat, despite the cold, feeling like I was being followed the whole walk back. When I opened the door, the house was dark. Maddie's door was ajar, light spilling out in a faint red hue like she'd lit candles again. But I didn't hear music or her usual sketchpad scratching. Just silence. I called out her name. No answer. I walked slowly down the hall, every board beneath my feet creaking in protest. I paused at the closet. The green handle gleamed in the dark. Something about it looked different, like it was pulsing. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's what it felt like. Like the air around it was humming, vibrating with some kind of wrongness. And then I smelled it, stronger than ever. The metallic, sour stink of rot and something ancient. I reached for the handle before I could stop myself. My hand moved on instinct like it wasn't mine anymore. The knob was cold. I turned it slowly. The door creaked open. Inside, it wasn't empty. The closet was deep, far deeper than it should have been. It wasn't just a storage space. It was a narrow tunnel stretching backward into blackness, lined with what looked like fabric and paper and skin. The walls were plastered with drawings, hundreds of them all of me. Sleeping, smiling, screaming. Some were distorted, my face melting, or blank eyes too wide or too hollow. In the center of the space was a mannequin full-size, dressed in one of my old sweaters. My missing necklace dangled from its plastic neck. Its head was wrapped in gauze, and drawn over the bandages was a crude version of my face smiling in red marker. At its feet sat a pile of things, tufts of my hair fingernail clippings, the chewed corner of a photo I hadn't even realized was gone. I stepped back, heart thudding so hard I felt dizzy. That's when I heard her, behind me. "You weren't supposed to see that," Maddie said. Her voice was hollow, detached. She doesn't like when people look at her. I turned. She was standing at the end of the hallway, barefoot, eyes unfocused. In her hand was a pair of scissors, long, sharp, stained with something dark. "I tried to be good," she whispered. "I tried to keep her quiet. But you made her remember." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat was dry. My body was frozen. She stepped closer. "She was my sister," she said. "You look just like her." Then, without warning, she dropped the scissors and crumpled to the floor, sobbing. I didn't move. Couldn't. I stood in front of the closet, the door wide open, the smell thick and suffocating, the mannequin grinning behind me. It felt like the hallway had bent inward, like the walls were breathing. The closet door creaked again, slowly closing on its own. I backed away, dragging Maddie with me as she shook and mumbled and clutched my wrist like a child. That was the last night we lived in that house. But it wasn't the last time I saw the green door. The police arrived just after dawn. I hadn't slept. I'd stayed in the kitchen with the lights on, Maddie curled up in a tight ball on the floor, murmuring incoherently. When the officers asked what happened, I tried to explain, but the words felt brittle in my mouth. I showed them the closet, showed them everything. They took photos, made calls, whispered to each other in low voices I wasn't supposed to hear. When one of them peeled back the gauze on the mannequin's head, he flinched. Underneath wasn't just plastic. There were pieces of something else, flesh-like, rotted, pressed, and stitched into the figure's cheeks and jaw. One officer threw up. Another turned pale and walked outside. Maddie didn't resist when they put her in the back of the ambulance. She just kept repeating, she was so small. She just wanted to come back. She just wanted her face. I didn't go back to that house. My parents flew in that night and helped me move everything out. I didn't even take my clothes. I just left. Burned the keys. Tried to pretend it had never happened. But the worst part wasn't the drawings or the mannequin or the whispers at night. The worst part came 2 weeks later when a detective called me. They had finished their investigation. Nothing in the closet was human, at least not enough to file charges. The materials were ambiguous. Likely synthetic, maybe preserved animal tissue. Maybe. But they did confirm something else. The closet had never been part of the house's original design. According to the blueprints, there was supposed to be a hallway there, a dead end. No door, no closet, just a wall. They found no records of remodeling, no drywall seams, nothing that made sense. It was as if the closet had always existed, but only in that version of the house. And Maddie, she had no known history of psychosis, no medication, no violent outbursts before she moved in. But when they contacted her family, they found out something chilling. Maddie had a sister, younger, died at 7 years old. Her name was Lila. And in one of the photos the family shared, Lila stood in front of a closet door. The same closet, same green handle, same house. I don't know what happened in that room. I don't know what Maddie let in or what was already there waiting. But sometimes when I'm walking through unfamiliar places, I see doors that don't quite belong. Narrow ones, faded paint, green handles. And every time I do, I keep walking. Because I know now some doors aren't meant to be opened. Not ever. Story 2. He knew my schedule better than I did. He asked if I still went to the gym on Tuesdays. That was the first thing that made my stomach turn. I hadn't mentioned my schedule to him. Not once. Not during the roommate interview, not in casual conversation, not even offhandedly while making coffee. But there he was, leaning against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, smiling like he'd known me for years. I brushed it off at first. Maybe he saw my shoes were gone every Tuesday night, or heard the front door when I left. Maybe it was nothing. But the more time I spent in that house, the more I realized it wasn't just a good guess. He knew things, specific things, personal things. He knew what time I left for work, how often I did laundry, the type of cereal I preferred, even the ringtone on my phone. I started feeling watched, not in a paranoid way, but in a subtle, gnawing way that made every quiet corner of the house feel too loud. His name was Seth. Clean-cut, polite, always calm. We shared a 2-bedroom rental in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. I found the listing on a housing app. Rent was cheap. The place was fully furnished. He'd lived there for years and seemed normal enough when we met. Said he was a freelance graphic designer. Quiet lifestyle. Preferred peaceful living. It sounded perfect. But I didn't know then that Seth wasn't just observant. He was collecting pieces of me, watching, copying, studying every detail like I was some puzzle he was trying to solve. And by the time I realized it, he already knew more about me than I knew about myself. At the beginning, everything felt oddly smooth, almost too smooth. The apartment was neat, almost sterile, like a showroom that had been lived in, just enough to seem real. Seth had a tidy bedroom, a spotless kitchen, and a living room that looked like it came from a mid-tier furniture catalog. Nothing too personal. No family photos, no clutter, just a few minimalist paintings and a collection of books with unbroken spines. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was steady and deliberate, like every word had been selected ahead of time. I remember thinking he was a little stiff, maybe just one of those socially awkward guys who preferred routine and quiet. And honestly, I liked that. I wasn't looking for a new best friend, just someone who wouldn't bring the party home at 2 a.m. Rent was cheap, utilities were split fairly, and he never made a mess. The first couple of weeks passed without incident. We'd cross paths in the kitchen or in the hall, share a polite nod or a few words about the weather. He always seemed to know when to back off, and never lingered in conversations too long, never made me feel like I had to perform. It was comfortable. Then I started to notice the little things. The way my favorite mug would already be sitting on the drying rack when I went to grab it, even though I hadn't used it. Or how the thermostat would be set exactly to my preferred temperature down to the decimal before I even touched it. I figured it was coincidence. Maybe we just had similar habits. But those similarities began to stack up. One night I was watching a movie on my laptop, an obscure indie horror film I'd mentioned once in passing to a friend on the phone. The next morning, Seth casually asked, "How did you like the ending?" I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't told him I watched it. I hadn't even said the title out loud in the apartment. He just smiled and said, "I figured you'd find it eventually. It's a hidden gem." I laughed it off, told myself maybe he'd just guessed, maybe he overheard the call. But the feeling stayed with me, clinging to the edges of my thoughts like smoke. That's when I started paying closer attention. I realized he was always home, no matter what time I came back. He never had visitors, never seemed to leave for errands. The fridge was always full, but I never saw him grocery shop. His car was parked in the same spot every day, yet the mileage barely changed. And sometimes late at night, I'd hear faint footsteps in the hallway, soft, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing in a dream. At first I thought maybe I was imagining things, but then I started waking up to small changes in my room. My charger moved a few inches, a drawer left slightly open, the window blinds adjusted just enough to let in a sliver of streetlight. I began double-checking locks, pushing furniture against the door before bed. But nothing stopped that creeping feeling that someone had been there. Not a stranger, not a thief. Someone who already knew everything. Someone who didn't need to break in because he never left. I told myself I was overreacting. That's what people do when something feels off, but not quite dangerous. You minimize it, try to be rational, try not to look crazy. But the unease didn't fade. It deepened, settled into my routine like a shadow that always showed up a few steps behind me. One night I decided to test a theory. I placed a small strip of masking tape over the seam of my bedroom door. Nothing obvious, just a hair-thin strip right at the bottom, barely visible, unless you knew it was there. Then I locked the door, wedged a chair beneath the handle, and went to bed. The next morning, the tape was gone. The chair hadn't moved. The door was still locked. But the tape was gone. My stomach flipped. I checked the floor, the trash, every corner of the room. Nothing. I tried to convince myself it had just peeled off during the night, but I didn't believe it. The next day, I bought a motion-activated camera and hid it in a stack of books on my dresser, pointed just slightly toward the bedroom door. I told myself it was for peace of mind, just in case. I didn't even check it the first few nights. I was afraid of what I might find. When I finally opened the footage, what I saw made my skin go cold. At 2:37 a.m., the door creaked open, slow, steady. A figure stepped into the room barefoot, wearing dark clothes. Seth. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't say a word. He just stood there watching me sleep for exactly 4 minutes, then walked out and gently closed the door behind him. I watched that clip 3 times, hoping I was wrong, hoping it was someone else, some terrible prank. But it wasn't. It was him. That night I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the apartment. I packed a small bag and crashed at a friend's place, too shaken to explain the full story. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't want to believe it myself. But it got worse. The next morning, when I returned to grab a few more things, I found a package on my bed. It was small, wrapped in brown paper with no label, no tape. Inside was a notebook, my notebook, the one I thought I'd lost weeks ago. Only now it was filled with pages I hadn't written, notes on my schedule, the names of people I'd mentioned, things I'd looked up online. Drawings detailed careful sketches of me at the kitchen table, brushing my teeth, walking to the mailbox. On the last page was a message written in blocky letters. I knew you'd want to see it. He didn't try to hide it, didn't even pretend. He wanted me to know. And that realization that this wasn't just secret watching, but a performance made everything feel 10 times worse. This wasn't about theft or boredom or even some passing obsession. This was deliberate, studied, controlled. I wasn't living with a man named Seth. I was living with someone who had made me into a project. And I was pretty sure he wasn't finished yet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright on the couch at my friend's apartment, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline, the notebook still sealed in a plastic bag beside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in the dark, still and patient like he had all the time in the world. I knew I couldn't go back to the apartment, not alone, not ever. But I also knew I needed to do something. I went to the police. I brought the video, the notebook, everything. The officer at the desk nodded, took notes, and told me they'd file a report, that they'd talk to him. But I could tell by her voice, calm, bureaucratic, tired, they didn't see it as urgent. No physical harm, no stolen property, just creepy roommate behavior. It wasn't illegal to watch someone if you lived with them. Not unless he'd recorded me without consent. Not unless he'd touched me. Not unless I was dead. I walked out of the station with a pit in my stomach and a clear understanding I was on my own. I made plans to leave. Found a short-term sublet across town, paid the deposit in cash, and packed my things the next day while Seth was out. Or at least I thought he was. I was halfway through boxing up my kitchen supplies when I noticed the hallway was too quiet. The front door was still locked. His bedroom door, which had been closed that morning, was open now, wide open. I called his name. No answer. I stepped closer, heart pounding. That's when I saw it. His room wasn't just clean. It was empty. Completely empty. No bed, no clothes, no computer. Just the books on the shelf and one photograph tacked to the wall with a thumbtack. It was a picture of me sleeping. I turned around fast, panic surging through me. That's when I saw him standing at the end of the hallway. Seth. He didn't say anything, just watched me with that same calm, unreadable expression. In one hand, he held a piece of paper. He stepped forward and offered it, like he was handing over a receipt. I took it trembling. It was a printout. It was a receipt from an online marketplace. A purchase under my name. A full-length mirror, a bed frame, bedding towels. Shipped to an address I didn't recognize. I thought you'd want a fresh start, he said. His voice was so calm, so normal. She liked soft colors. You don't wear them much, but they suit you. I couldn't speak. My throat locked. I backed toward the door, fumbling for my keys, my phone, anything. You don't have to run, he said. You're already there. I've already built it. She's waiting. I bolted, ran so hard down the stairs I nearly fell. I didn't stop until I was in my car doors locked, gas pedals slammed to the floor. When I looked back, he was still standing in the doorway watching me with a faint smile. Like none of it was strange. Like he knew I'd be back. And the worst part was a small part of me wondered if he was right. I moved out that same night. Left the kitchen half-packed, didn't even bother grabbing my toiletries. I just drove, checked into a cheap motel near the airport, and stayed up until sunrise with the lights on and the chair wedged under the doorknob. The next morning, I filed for a restraining order. Showed them the footage, the notebook, the receipt with my name on it. This time, someone took me seriously. An officer came to the old apartment later that day, but Seth was already gone. Vanished. No forwarding address, no trace. His online accounts had been deleted. Even the landlord claimed they couldn't reach him. I changed my number, got a new phone, scrubbed my social media. For a while, it felt like I could breathe again. I moved into a new building with a locked front gate, upgraded my locks, kept pepper spray within reach at all times. But even with the distance, even after weeks passed, and his name faded from casual thoughts, something kept gnawing at me. That address on the shipping receipt. It wasn't one I recognized, but I hadn't looked it up, not really. I told myself I didn't care, that it wasn't my problem anymore. But one night, curiosity clawed through the fear. I typed it in. It was a duplex on the edge of town, barely visible on street view, half hidden behind overgrown trees. No listings, no tenants, no recent sales. But the image froze me, because on the second floor in the window was a shape, a silhouette, a figure standing behind a curtain. And the curtain was the exact same pattern as the ones in my old bedroom. I zoomed in, heart hammering. It was blurry, distorted, but the shape was unmistakably human. And in that moment, I knew. He had recreated it. My room, my things, my routine. In some forgotten corner of the city, there was a version of me that he had built from the ground up. Maybe it was just for watching, maybe for practicing, or maybe it was for someone else entirely. A substitute, a replacement. I never went there. I never reported the address. Some things you don't need confirmed. Some horrors are better left undocumented. But now, whenever I move into a new place, I check the windows. I check for cameras. I check for the space behind the mirrors. And every time I feel someone watching, even just for a second, I think about that moment in the hallway. The way he looked at me. Not with hate, not even obsession, but ownership. Like he'd already claimed me, filed me away, and was just waiting for the next version of me to move in. Story 3. He said the basement was off limits. Now I know why. He said the basement was off limits. That was the first thing I remember him telling me when I moved in. Not in a threatening way, more like a polite heads up, the way someone might warn you not to use the left burner on the stove because it clicks too long. I had just signed the month-to-month lease, handed him the cashier's check, and we were standing in the kitchen while he showed me where the trash bags were stored. Then he nodded toward the back hallway and said, "The door at the end stays closed. It sticks anyway, not much down there but tools and junk." I didn't ask questions. I didn't care. The place was cheap, clean, and quiet, and after crashing on couches for 3 months, it felt like an upgrade. The guy, Alan, was in his 50s, thin, silver-haired, the kind of man who looked like he used to be in a band, but now fixed lawnmowers and smoked menthols out of habit. He kept to himself, never bothered me, and the upstairs tenants were an exchange couple from Germany who barely spoke English, but were friendly enough to offer me leftover spaghetti on my first night. It was the kind of peaceful arrangement you never question too hard. But I should have. Because 2 weeks after I moved in, I started hearing noises beneath the floor. And I realized the basement wasn't just off limits. It was hiding something. Something that scratched. Something that breathed. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. The house itself was old, but solid, one of those split-level rentals tucked into a quiet street just outside the city, shaded by tall, swaying trees that kept the place cool even in late summer. My room was on the main floor, tucked behind the living room, with a big window that looked out onto the backyard. The walls were a muted yellow, the carpet old but clean, and there was already a small desk in the corner left behind by a former tenant. It wasn't much, but after months of living out of a duffel bag, it felt like a reset. Alan was polite in a distant sort of way. He'd offer a half wave when our paths crossed, maybe ask how work was going, but he didn't linger. He didn't ask personal questions, didn't hover. It was exactly what I wanted. For the first few days, the only strange thing was how rarely he left the house. I worked evenings at a nearby diner, And when I came home at midnight or later, I'd often see the glow of his TV flickering behind the cracked blinds. Some nights, I'd hear footsteps moving around above me, slow, steady like pacing. But I figured he was just an insomniac. Maybe the kind of guy who couldn't sleep unless he was walking or watching late-night crime shows. I didn't think much of it. Then about a week in, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, sharp, sour like bleach, and something damp left too long in the heat. It seemed to come from the back hallway near the basement door. I told myself it was just mold or maybe a busted water heater. But the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. And then the noises started. I'd be sitting at my desk reading when I'd hear a sudden clatter below me. A bang. A dragging sound. Once I heard what sounded like coughing wet and low, like it came from someone trying to clear their throat through a mouthful of water. I asked Alan about it one morning, trying to sound casual. "Hey, is there something going on down in the basement pipes, maybe?" He didn't even look up from his coffee. "Old house," he said. "It settles weird. Probably just the plumbing." He took a sip, then added, "Nothing to worry about." That was the end of the conversation. No follow-up, no explanation. Just that same flat, mechanical tone. I noticed after that he started locking the basement door more aggressively. Not just the bolt, I'd hear him slide a latch from the inside. Sometimes, more than once, I found myself staring at that door whenever I passed it, tracing the chipped paint, the scuff marks around the frame, the faint black smudge near the handle. It was like the house was trying to say something, like it wanted me to listen. But I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to understand what was beneath my feet. It wasn't until I started hearing the knocking that I truly began to feel afraid. It was different from the occasional thumps and creaks I had told myself were normal. This was deliberate, rhythmic 3 knocks, slow, and even like someone politely requesting to come in. Always at night, always from the basement. The first time it happened, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when the sound jolted me upright. I sat there in the dark, holding my breath, heart pounding in my ears. I waited for it to stop, for some sign that I had imagined it. But it didn't come again that night. Not until the following evening, when I heard it again, 3 knocks, clear and steady, then silence. I got up, crept into the hallway, and stared at the basement door. It was locked like always. Nothing seemed disturbed. But the smell was worse now, thick and acrid, like rusted metal and rotting meat buried under bleach. I told myself it was still plumbing. Maybe animals in the walls. But I started to sleep with the light on. Then one night I came home late from work and Alan wasn't in the living room. No glow from the TV, no footsteps upstairs. Just silence. I figured he'd gone out, maybe to the store, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him actually leave the house. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and started toward my room until I noticed the basement door was cracked open. Just an inch, just enough to see the sliver of shadow stretching across the floor. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed to back away, to leave it alone, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But something pulled me forward. I reached out and slowly pushed the door wider. The light switch on the wall didn't work. The stairs descended into darkness, steep and narrow, with the faintest glint of metal at the bottom, like a puddle, or maybe something worse. The smell hit me full force then, and I gagged. I took a step back. That's when I heard it. Breathing, slow, labored, coming from below, followed by a sound I will never forget, a scraping, dragging sound, like something with too many limbs trying to climb upward. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and stumbled back into the kitchen, heart racing, hands trembling. I waited for Alan to come home, but he didn't. Not that night. Not the next day. I knocked on his bedroom door, no answer. I called his name, nothing. Finally, I tried the knob. It wasn't locked. I opened the door slowly, expecting to find a bed, maybe some clothes or signs of life. But the room was completely empty. No furniture, no sheets, no photos. Just a small metal latch on the floor where a rug might have been, and beside it, a single item. An old rotary phone unplugged, sitting on the floor like someone had left it there decades ago. It rang once. Just once. Then stopped. I stood there frozen, staring at the phone, listening as the basement door slowly creaked open again behind me. I turned around slowly, every part of me resisting what I already knew was happening. The basement door was open again, wide this time. I didn't hear footsteps. No signs of anyone coming up the stairs. Just the dark mouth of the stairwell yawning open, breathing that same foul metallic stench into the hallway. I should have run. Should have called someone. But instead I stepped forward. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. A compulsion. The same sick magnetism you feel when staring over the edge of a rooftop, wondering what would happen if you leaned just a little too far. I flicked the light switch again, hoping for some miracle. Nothing. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and began descending the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder, heavier, like it was thick with moisture or grief. The beam of light barely cut through the darkness. The basement wasn't just cluttered, it was wrong. The space felt warped, too deep for the size of the house. The walls were bare concrete, stained and flaking. At the far end, something flickered, a low, buzzing glow. I approached slowly and saw a room, a cell built into the wall with rusted iron bars. Inside it was a cot, chains, and the shape of something huddled beneath a torn blanket, breathing. I froze. My light caught on something just outside the cell, a stack of notebooks, hundreds of them piled neatly. I picked one up and flipped through. Pages and pages of cramped handwriting, sketches, names. My name. Dated entries going back months before I ever moved in. Descriptions of me, what I wore, what I said on the phone, how I slept. I dropped the book. That's when the figure under the blanket stirred. I took a step back. The chains rattled. A hand slipped from beneath the fabric, thin, pale, trembling. It wasn't Alan. It wasn't even a man. It was a woman, her face gaunt, eyes wide and glazed. She stared at me, lips parted like she wanted to speak, but couldn't remember how. I stammered out something, an apology, a question I don't even remember. Behind me, a soft click echoed through the concrete room. I spun around. Alan was standing at the top of the stairs, calm, silent, holding something in his hand, a length of chain. "You weren't supposed to see this?" he said. His voice was so calm it made my skin crawl. "I told you the basement was off limits." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. He took a slow step down the stairs. I backed away toward the woman in the cell, toward the notebooks and rusted bars and everything I didn't understand. "She used to be like you," Alan continued. "Curious, clever, wanted to know what was under the floor." He smiled then. "Now she knows." I turned and ran, not up the stairs, but deeper into the basement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from that voice, from that calm, measured tone that sounded like it had practiced this moment 1,000 times. I found another door in the far wall, metal warped, half-rotted from the bottom. I kicked it open. A tunnel stretched out beyond, long and dark and reeking of old soil and decay. I didn't think. I just ran. The tunnel stretched on far longer than it should have. My phone's flashlight began to dim, the battery finally choking after hours of neglect, casting everything in a flickering strobe of shadows and rot. I ran with one hand brushing the wall, heart thundering in my chest, every breath a fight against the damp, suffocating air. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, steady, slow, methodical. Alan wasn't chasing me. He was following like he already knew how the story ended. Eventually, the tunnels sloped upward. The concrete gave way to packed earth, and then suddenly, I was outside, spilling out into the weeds behind a rusted tool shed, gasping like I'd been underwater for days. The night air was sharp and freezing. I scrambled up the embankment, stumbled through someone's backyard, and didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour gas station a mile away. I must have looked like a lunatic, filthy, bleeding eyes wild because the clerk called the cops before I even opened my mouth. I told them everything. The cell, the notebooks, the woman. They found the house the next morning. Empty, completely abandoned. The basement was sealed, new drywall, freshly painted, as if it had never been disturbed. No chains, no cell, no woman. Just a clean, sterile room that smelled faintly of bleach and rust. I showed them the notebooks I'd grabbed in my rush. They flipped through the pages unmoved. Looks like fiction, one officer said. Creepy, sure, but not criminal. They ran a search on Alan, no record, no ID, no tax returns. Not even a birth certificate. As if the man never existed. As if he'd never rented the house to me at all. They told me I'd been scammed, that maybe I'd fallen for an elaborate hoax. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard, and I wasn't the only one. A week later, I got a message on an anonymous number. No name, just an image. It was a drawing sketched in pencil, rough and fast. It showed a hallway, narrow and familiar. At the end of it, a basement door, slightly ajar. A single phrase was written in blocky handwriting beneath it. Do you remember where you left her? I stared at it for a long time, heart in my throat. The police hadn't found her. Maybe they never looked. Maybe the basement wasn't the only one. Maybe that tunnel didn't just lead out, it led elsewhere. To other places, to other doors. Sometimes I still hear the knocking, soft and steady late at night when everything is quiet. 3 knocks, always 3, always. And part of me knows if I ever answer, if I ever go back, I won't be coming up the stairs again. Story 4. My roommate talked in her sleep. But the voices weren't hers. I took the room because it was cheap. That's how these stories always start, right? You find a listing online, barely furnished, oddly worded, no photos of the bathroom. But the rent is half of what it should be, and you're desperate broke, telling yourself you can handle anything for a few months. That was me. I just moved to the city after a brutal breakup and needed a place fast. The ad said, quiet tenant preferred. Furnished room, shared kitchen, no pets, no overnight guests, cash only. It was in an older part of town, tucked between a boarded-up laundromat and a liquor store with bars on the windows. The kind of street that always looks like it's about to rain. When I showed up for the walkthrough, the landlord didn't give me his name. Just opened the front door and said, "You can look, but don't open the locked door upstairs. It's not for tenants." He said it like it was nothing like telling someone not to peek behind a curtain. I told myself I didn't care. I wasn't here to snoop. I just needed a roof and a place to sleep. I moved in that night. But the door at the end of the upstairs hallway never left my mind. Not because it was locked, but because sometimes, just after midnight, I'd see light coming from underneath it. And I swear I heard someone whispering my name from the other side. The rest of the house was exactly what you'd expect. For the price-peeling wallpaper, a kitchen with flickering fluorescent lights, and a faint, musty smell that clung to everything like damp wool. The furniture looked like it had been scavenged from a dozen estate sales mismatched chairs, a cracked leather couch, and a glass coffee table permanently smudged with fingerprints that wouldn't wipe away. My room was small, but livable. A narrow twin bed with a sagging mattress, a chipped dresser, and a dusty floor lamp that buzzed when I turned it on. The window faced an alley filled with rusted fire escapes and humming AC units. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The landlord, an older man with heavy eyelids and a quiet, breathy voice, lived on the first floor. I never saw him leave. He didn't talk much, just grunted in reply when I said hello, and collected rent in cash once a week, always slipping the envelope into a drawer in the kitchen without opening it. He never asked questions, never made conversation, and he never acknowledged the door upstairs. It was painted a dull gray, its brass handle tarnished and cold to the touch. I passed it every time I went to the bathroom, every time I did laundry in the tiny closet with a washing machine that groaned like it was in pain. During the day, the door was quiet, still, like it was just part of the architecture, forgotten and useless. But after dark, when the house had gone still, and the city outside had sunk into that eerie hush between midnight and dawn, and the air in the hallway changed. It thickened, got heavy, and from under the locked door, I'd sometimes see lights soft and flickering like candlelight, or an old TV set left on static. Once around 1:30 in the morning, I got up to get water and swore I heard something behind the door. A whisper. A voice that said my name, not loud, not urgent, just a soft, drawn-out version of it, like someone was remembering it. I stood there, frozen glass in hand, trying to convince myself it was just the pipes, or the wind, or the landlord muttering in his sleep. But it didn't sound like him. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. Still, I didn't knock. I didn't open it. I went back to bed and told myself it was nothing. But the dreams started that week. Strange, vivid dreams where I was walking through the house, only everything was different. Longer hallways, windows that showed nothing but darkness, doors that opened into brick walls or empty stairwells. And always, there was the door. But in the dreams, it was open. Just a crack. Enough to see someone watching me from the other side. Not the landlord, not a stranger. Someone who looked almost like me, only older, pale, wrong. The dreams became more frequent, more invasive. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced someone had just been in the room with me. The hallway outside my door always seemed colder than the rest of the house. And sometimes when I passed the locked door, I could swear I heard breathing slow measured, as though someone were standing inches away on the other side. I started avoiding the upstairs at night altogether, brushing my teeth early, keeping water in my room so I wouldn't have to go to the kitchen. Still, the door found ways to creep into my routine. One morning, I woke to find it slightly ajar. Not open, not wide, but just enough that the latch didn't catch. I stared at it for a long time, unmoving, as the air around it felt charged like static before a lightning strike. I finally got close enough to push it shut again, then twisted the knob just to test it. Still locked, still solid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had opened on its own, that it had been watching me. After that, things escalated. I started finding small items on my dresser, objects I hadn't seen before. A rusted key, a tiny porcelain shoe, a lock of hair tied with black thread. I thought I was losing it. Maybe I was sleepwalking, acting out some subconscious breakdown brought on by stress and loneliness. But then I checked my phone's voice memos, a habit I had recording ideas and reminders while half asleep. One of the memos was just static. pure droning white noise almost a minute long. Except about 30 seconds in, there was a voice. My voice. But I hadn't recorded it. It said in a flat, hollow tone, "Open the door." I'm still waiting. I stopped sleeping. I moved my dresser in front of my bedroom door. At night, started carrying a flashlight and a pocket knife, like they would somehow protect me. The landlord didn't help. When I confronted him, showed him the objects, asked about the door, he just looked at me with that same lifeless gaze and said, "You were told. It's not for tenants." He turned and walked into his room, shutting the door behind him like we hadn't spoken at all. That night, I tried to leave. Packed a bag, grabbed my keys, made it halfway down the stairs before I heard footsteps above me. Not heavy, not hurried, but wrong. They moved slowly down the hallway, pausing outside my room, then stopping at the locked door. Then came the knock. Just once. Sharp and deliberate. I turned to look, and for a split second I could swear the light under the door turned red. Not flickering, not soft. Just solid, pulsing red. Like something inside had finally decided it was time. I left the bag at the bottom of the stairs and ran back to my room, bolting the door and shoving everything I owned against it. The knocking didn't come again, but something else did. I fell asleep with the flashlight pointed at the door. When I woke up, the beam was still on, but the door was wide open. And across my mirror, written in something dark and oily, were 5 words, "You left me in there." I stared at the message on the mirror, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, maybe condensation or a sick joke played by someone with a spare key. But the smell hit me next, a bitter chemical stench like burnt plastic and decay. It filled my lungs, made my eyes water. I backed away, stepping over the flashlight, bumping into my dresser, which now felt unnaturally cold to the touch. Something had been in my room. Something had stood over me while I slept. I should have run then. Should have packed a bag and never looked back. But something pulled me toward the hallway, toward the door. I needed answers. I needed it to stop. The upstairs hallway was quiet when I stepped out, my bare feet touching the cool floorboards. The door at the end was wide open now. Not cracked, not barely ajar. Fully open, revealing a staircase that hadn't been there before. It descended sharply carved in raw wood, lit only by that same dull red glow I'd seen before. The walls around the opening were warped, stretched, as if the house had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. I called out just once. "Hello." My voice echoed down the stairs but didn't return. I told myself I'd just go a few steps down, just enough to prove it was nothing, just enough to see. But the moment I set foot on the staircase, the house changed. The air turned heavy, pressing against my chest, and the sounds of the street outside had vanished. The deeper I went, the more the steps seemed to elongate beneath me. The red light pulsed softly like a heartbeat, guiding me forward. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a long hallway that didn't match the structure of the house at all. Concrete walls, slick with moisture. Old pipes hissing along the ceiling, the floor stained in colors I didn't recognize. And at the far end stood a door. The real door. Massive, rusted, bolted from the outside like it had been meant to hold something in. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming to turn around to run, but my body kept moving like it was being pulled by something ancient and familiar. When I reached the door, I saw the carvings, dozens of symbols etched into the wood and metal, some that looked like letters, others like scratches made by something with claws. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the bolt. The metal burned when I touched it, searing my palm, but I pulled anyway. One latch, then the next. Then the door opened. It didn't swing its side. A gust of warm air hit me thick with rot and something worse, something alive. And in the darkness beyond, something moved. Not quickly, not threateningly, just deliberately. It stepped forward one slow movement at a time until I could make out a shape. It was me, or something trying to be me. Pale, gaunt, hollow-eyed, wearing the same shirt I'd thrown out months ago. It looked at me and smiled, a twisted, broken smile that made every muscle in my body tense. Then it whispered in my voice, "I've been so lonely." I turned and ran, stumbling up the stairs, slamming the false door behind me, but the red light followed, pulsing against my back. As I burst into my room and slammed my own door shut, I heard it behind me, those same footsteps in the hallway, soft and steady. The landlord never came. The neighbors never noticed. And from that night on, the door upstairs never closed again. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my back to the door, eyes fixed on the hallway, listening for footsteps that never fully came, watching the red glow that now pulsed faintly from the top of the stairs. It wasn't bright anymore, just enough to remind me it was still open, still waiting. By morning, I packed what I could into a duffel bag and left. I didn't say goodbye to the landlord. I didn't even close the front door behind me. I walked 6 blocks before calling a friend to come pick me up. And when she asked what had happened, I just said, the room wasn't safe. I stayed on her couch for a while, tried to reset, tried to forget. But I couldn't. The dreams followed me. Only now, they weren't dreams. I'd find my bedroom door cracked open in the morning when I knew I'd locked it. My reflection in the mirror would blink half a second too late. I started waking up with bruises on my arms in the shape of fingers I didn't recognize. One night while brushing my teeth, I glanced in the mirror and saw it again, that version of me. Standing at the end of the hall, not moving, just watching. I turned around, heart in my throat. Nothing there. But the red light, it had followed. Faint and distant, like it was leaking through some invisible crack in the wall between worlds. I moved to another city, changed my number, got a new job. But I still don't sleep well. I keep a chair propped under the doorknob every night, and I never hang mirrors anymore. And sometimes around 3 a.m., I hear that voice again, mine, but not quite whispering from somewhere behind the walls. You left me in there, like it's waiting, patient, forgiving, like it understands that I couldn't bring it back with me. But one day, maybe I'll forget to lock a door. Maybe I'll look too long into a dark window. And maybe when I turn around, it won't be standing at the end of the hallway anymore. Maybe it'll be closer, smiling, ready to come home. Story 5. I was the one who found his hidden room. And what was in it? It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. Just 6 months tops. I had landed a short-term contract in a new city and needed a place fast. The listing was simple: 1 bedroom in quiet house, backyard access, shared kitchen. Ideal for someone low maintenance. The rent was absurdly cheap for the neighborhood, and when I showed up to view it, the house looked normal. A little too clean, maybe. The front yard was trimmed within an inch of its life, the blinds all perfectly aligned. The owner, Marianne, was polite but distant. Late 40s, neat black hair, calm voice. She barely looked me in the eye as she walked me through the house, just pointed out the basics and handed me the keys. She said only one thing out of the ordinary: you'll hear noises at night. They're nothing to worry about. Just don't go in the attic. I laughed a little, thought she was joking. She didn't smile. I told myself she was probably just quirky, maybe anxious. I moved in that weekend. But by the second night, I stopped laughing. Because at 2:14 a.m. exactly, I woke up to footsteps, slow and heavy, crossing the ceiling above me. And I remembered that the attic didn't have a floor. I tried to rationalize it at first. Old houses creak, maybe raccoons or a squirrel trapped between the roof beams. Still, something about the sound unsettled me. It wasn't random like the skitter of small animals. It was deliberate step, pause, step. Like someone was pacing. Like someone knew I was lying there below, frozen under the blankets, counting every footfall. The attic door was in the hallway ceiling, one of those fold-down panels with a rope dangling from it. I passed under it every time I went to the bathroom. And every time I did, I felt like something above was waiting, watching, listening. Marianne didn't bring it up again. We rarely spoke. She spent most of her time in the basement where she had a studio set up. She said she was an artist, but I never saw her bring in canvases or take any out. I asked once what she painted. She just said, "I try to capture what's already here." And then she smiled. But it was the kind of smile you give when you're hiding something sharp behind your teeth. My bedroom was small but bright during the day. I kept the curtains open, let the sun soak the walls, tried to forget what the house felt like at night. But every morning, I'd find tiny things misplaced. My toothbrush upside down. My phone moved 6 inches from where I left it. The worst was the closet door. I always kept it closed. But 3 times I woke to find it cracked open just enough to see the darkness inside. I started pushing a chair in front of it before bed just to feel sane. And yet the footsteps didn't stop. Always at 2:14 a.m. Never earlier, never later. Sometimes they'd move fast, like someone was running from one side of the attic to the other. Other times, they crept slowly, so slow it made the air in my lungs feel too thick. Once I laid in bed, phone in hand, trying to record the sound. But when I played it back the next morning, all I heard was static and then faintly a whisper. My name, drawn out like a sigh. That was the moment I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. Something was in the attic. Something that Marion refused to talk about. And every night it got a little bolder. One night after another, restless half-sleep filled with muffled thuds and the occasional dragging noise above, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to confront Marion, not to accuse her, just to get some clarity. I waited until late morning, when the house felt the most normal, the most harmless. I found her in the kitchen slicing something pale on a wooden cutting board. She didn't look up. I asked carefully, "Hey, about the attic. Is there any way an animal might have gotten in?" She stopped slicing. Her knife hovered over the board. Then she turned to me slowly and said, "I told you not to worry about it." I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, I know. But the footsteps are getting louder. I just want to know if I should be concerned." Her expression changed, not angry, but cold, like she was studying me. This house is old. It remembers things she said. You should try to forget the noises. Most people who do stay longer. Then she turned back to her cutting board, and that was the end of the conversation. That afternoon, I tried to leave. Not permanently, just to break a night away to clear my head. But when I turned my car key, nothing happened. Dead. I called for a tow, but no one came. I tried ordering a ride, but the app kept crashing. Then my phone shut off completely, even though it was fully charged. I looked back at the house, and for a moment, I swore the attic window, the one that was always covered, had a sliver of curtain pulled back. Like someone was watching. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the door. I didn't sleep. I just laid there, flashlight in hand, staring at the ceiling. At 2:14 a.m. on the dot, the footsteps began again, only this time they stopped directly above me. Not pacing, not moving, just standing. And then the faintest creak of pressure, like someone kneeling down, listening. I held my breath. The sound didn't stop. Then I heard something slide, a long, slow drag of wood across floorboards. And suddenly the ceiling above my closet let out a sharp, cracking sound. I jumped up and opened the closet door. It was empty at first, but then I looked up. The ceiling panel inside the closet had shifted, just slightly, just enough to see a gap. And through that gap, a single eye stared back at me. Unblinking, wide, familiar. It was mine, or something trying to be. I slammed the closet doors shut so hard the walls rattled, my heart hammering like it was trying to crack my ribs open. I didn't scream. Couldn't. Something about that eye, the way it stared without blinking, without emotion, stole the breath straight from my lungs. I backed away, grabbing my backpack and shoving whatever I could reach into it, not caring if I left everything else behind. I was done pretending. I was getting out. I didn't care if I had to walk all night. I yanked the door open, ready to run straight out of the house, but the hallway was dark. Too dark. The kind of thick velvet dark that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your skin. I tried the light switch. Nothing. My phone was still dead. I turned back toward my room, but the door had closed behind me. Slowly, on its own. I put my hand on the knob and felt something warm, wet in the metal. I pulled back. My hand came away smeared with something dark. Not paint, not dirt. It smelled like iron. The footsteps started again. Not above me this time. On the stair. Coming down. I froze, pressed my back to the wall, trying to listen over the roar of my pulse. The steps were slow, steady, but they weren't Marion's. These were heavier, dragging slightly, like someone unfamiliar with how feet were supposed to work. I inched toward the front door, but before I reached it, I saw something that made me stop cold. The attic hatch still overhead was open now. Hanging low, the ladder extended, touching the floor just feet from me. At the top of it, silhouetted in the dark above, was a figure. It was crouching, fingers gripping the edge of the opening, long and wrong in every way that matters. It tilted its head toward me slowly, curiously, and then began to descend. One step at a time. No rush. Like it already knew I had nowhere to go. I backed away, trying to find my voice to scream, to do anything. That's when Marion stepped out from the shadows of the living room, calm, holding a cup of tea. "You shouldn't have looked," she said softly. "Now it knows you're ready." The figure dropped to the floor behind her with a sound like wet wood snapping. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Marion didn't look back. "It used to be mine," she whispered. "But these things, they need new homes eventually." And then she stepped aside, leaving a clear path between me and it. Whatever it was. Whatever wore my face, my eyes, my shape. But stretched, emptied wrong. It took a step toward me. Took a step back. And behind me, the front door creaked open slowly, as if the house itself had decided to let me leave. But I knew even then that leaving wouldn't fix anything. Because the thing in the attic hadn't just looked like me. It had moved like me. Thought like me. It had waited until I was alone, curious, broken enough to listen. And now that it was free, I wasn't sure it needed the attic anymore. I stumbled out the front door just before sunrise, the sky bleeding a pale orange over the tops of the silent trees. My legs felt numb, my breath shallow and fast, but I didn't stop moving. I didn't look back. The house didn't follow me, not physically. It stayed there on that quiet street, the curtains perfectly drawn, the yard trimmed to the edge of obsession. But I carried something with me. In the days that followed, I tried to explain what happened. I reported the house described Marion the attic, the figure everything. But there were no records of a Marion living at that address. The property had been vacant for over a year. According to the landlord company, the listing was never active. No contracts, no receipts, no rent, nothing. The neighbors said they hadn't seen anyone come or go from that house in months, maybe longer. When I returned with a police escort, the attic door was sealed. Not with a latch or padlock, completely gone. Dry-walled over, smooth and perfect like it had never existed. The cops gave me the look, the one that says, "You're lucky you're not in handcuffs." I didn't argue. I just left again. I thought maybe distance would help. I moved 2 cities away, got a new job, changed my number. But the thing about something learning how to be you is that it doesn't stay behind. It remembers, it waits, and eventually it finds a way in. A week ago, I woke up with even found muddy footprints leading from the hallway into my bedroom. Bare feet, my size, my stride. The door had still been locked, the windows sealed. And I live alone. Yesterday, I was on a video call with a friend. And she said halfway through, "You okay? You look off. Like you're lagging or something." I played the call back later. At the 27-minute mark, there was a frame, just one, where I wasn't blinking, just staring, not moving, eyes too wide, mouth slightly parted, no expression. And then it continued, like nothing happened. Today, I found a handwritten note on my pillow. 5 words in block letters, shaky but certain, "You were never the first." I don't sleep anymore. I don't turn my back on mirrors. And sometimes I catch myself hesitating before speaking, wondering if the voice that comes out will still be mine. Because it's out now. It's watching, learning. And all it needs is for you to listen. Just once. Just long enough to wonder what's waiting in the attic. Or worse, what's already come down. Story 6. She was normal. Until I found the grave in the backyard. I found the notebook under the floorboards. It wasn't hidden well, just slipped between 2 loose planks beneath the bed of the rental cabin I'd booked for the weekend. I wasn't even looking for anything, just chasing down a cold draft when my heel caught the edge of the warped wood. It popped up with a dry creak, and there it was. A small, battered journal bound in cracked leather, the corners curled, the pages yellowed. I thought maybe it had belonged to a previous guest, some traveler who'd used the cabin as a quiet writing retreat. But when I opened it, the first line made me stop breathing. "If you're reading this, you need to leave before sunset." I stared at the sentence for a long time, wondering if it was a joke, part of some creepy scavenger hunt. But the next line chilled me even more. I tried to warn the last one, but he wouldn't listen. I heard what they did to him. The page was stained near the bottom, like someone's hands had trembled while writing. I flipped ahead and saw sketches symbols I didn't recognize, a crude map of the cabin, and something that looked like a trapped door beneath the fireplace. I closed the journal slowly, trying to shake off the sudden unease crawling up my spine. I was alone. Miles from town, no cell service. And now the place didn't feel like an escape anymore. It felt like bait. I set the journal down on the dusty kitchen table, trying to convince myself it was some elaborate prank, maybe left behind by a bored teenager or a horror-loving guest with a dark sense of humor. But the more I flipped through the pages, the harder that was to believe. The entries weren't written all at once. They were spaced out, different inks, different levels of handwriting clarity, like whoever wrote them had done so over time. Or maybe more than one person had added to it. The early pages were vague, describing unease, strange dreams, and a growing sense of being watched at night. Later entries got specific. One described waking up to the sound of footsteps on the roof, even though there were no trees nearby, and the cabin's elevation made climbing impossible. Another said the furniture moved on its own, while the guests slept always shifted to face the fireplace by morning. But the most unsettling entries simply read, "It knocks at 3:12 a.m. Don't answer, no matter what it sounds like." I laughed nervously, almost angry at myself for feeling spooked. I shoved the notebook into a drawer and walked outside for air. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. No other buildings in sight. The silence was almost too perfect, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I walked the perimeter of the cabin trying to locate anything strange. At first, nothing stood out. But when I passed the firewood stack near the back wall, I noticed something odd, scratches along the ground in a circular pattern. Faint, but definitely intentional, like someone or something had dragged something heavy around that spot. The markings lined up with the trapdoor shown in the journal's drawing. When I went back inside and checked the fireplace, I didn't see anything unusual at first glance. Just cold ash, soot-stained bricks, and a faint burned smell. But then I tapped my knuckles against the stones at the base, and one gave a hollow sound. I crouched, brushing away loose ash and grit, revealing a wooden panel beneath. It was old gray and clearly not part of the original design. My stomach tightened. I remembered the drawing, the map, the warnings. I stood and backed away slowly. I told myself I wasn't going to mess with it. But as night started to fall, and the forest outside darkened into something denser and quieter, I couldn't stop glancing at the hearth. I left every light on in the cabin and tried to watch something mindless on my laptop. But when the power flickered and the lights dimmed all at once, I knew something wasn't right. I opened the drawer to grab the journal again. But it was gone. I stood there frozen, staring at the empty drawer as the last bit of daylight vanished from the cabin windows. The overhead light buzzed, then popped with a sharp snap, leaving the room steeped in a sickly amber glow from a single standing lamp in the corner. My hands were shaking. I hadn't moved the journal. I hadn't even touched the drawer since putting it there. I searched the entire room under cushions, behind furniture, even inside the kitchen cabinets. Nothing. It was just gone. And the strange part wasn't that it had disappeared. It was that something in me wasn't surprised. It was as if the cabin had taken it back. As if I wasn't meant to have it for long. I tried to calm myself, tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was tired, maybe I'd misplaced it without realizing, maybe I was letting the isolation get to me. I grabbed my phone, planning to pack up and drive out that night, but the signal was still dead. Worse, the battery had drained to zero, even though I'd barely used it. I looked at my laptop, same story. Black screen. Wouldn't turn on. That's when I heard the first knock. 3 slow raps against the front door. Not frantic, not threatening. Just patient. I stood up fast, nearly knocking over the chair. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it echoed through the floorboards. I stepped toward the window beside the door and peeked through the curtain. Nothing, just the empty porch and the woods beyond. I waited. No movement, no sound. I was about to step back when I heard it again, 3 knocks this time from the back door. I spun around, every hair on my body standing up. I moved through the kitchen, flipped on the porch light. Again, nothing. I stood with my back against the wall, breathing shallow, waiting for something, anything. Silence. I backed away slowly, only for the knocking to start again, this time from the side of the cabin. Then the roof. Then the fireplace. Tap, tap, tap. All around me, like something was circling, testing the structure, looking for a way in. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound grew sharper, closer, until it wasn't knocking anymore. It was scratching from inside the walls. I ran to the fireplace and stared at the floor where the false panel had been. It was open. Not fully just a sliver, but enough to see into the dark space beneath. I leaned in, slowly shining my flashlight down. The beam caught something just out of reach, torn paper, something that looked like fingernail marks on the wood. And then from the depths, I heard a voice. Mine. It whispered soft and ragged, "Help me. I'm still down here." I fell backward, scrambling across the floor. I slammed the trapdoor shut and shoved the coffee table over it, hard in my throat. The house went dead quiet again. No knocking, no scratching, nothing. But the air was different now, heavy, pressurized, like I was no longer alone. I looked at the fireplace one last time. The ashes had been disturbed, and just above the hearth, scrawled into the soot-covered brick, were the words, "One guest must stay." Panic bloomed in my chest like a living thing. I grabbed my keys, flashlight, and jacket, determined to get to the car and leave everything behind. I didn't care about the rental agreement or my bag or the gear I'd brought for the weekend. I needed to get out. But when I opened the door, the forest looked wrong. The trees were still there, yes, but their silhouettes were too sharp, too tall, leaning in toward the cabin like they were listening. And the path, the one I'd driven in on, was gone. Not overgrown, not muddy, gone. Just solid, undisturbed forest floor, as if no road had ever cut through it. I stepped back inside, closed the door slowly. My hands were trembling. My thoughts scattered, frantic. That's when I saw it right there on the kitchen table. The journal. The same worn leather cover, open to a new page I hadn't seen before. Scrawled in a different, almost frantic handwriting, it read, "It only lets you leave if it's fed. Don't trust what it shows you." And beneath that, in smaller, tighter script, "You're already splitting." I blinked. What did that mean, splitting? I looked down at my hands, and for a split second, they didn't feel like mine. The skin looked too pale, the knuckles too sharp. But when I blinked again, everything was normal, or close enough. The trap door in the fireplace had slid open further now, revealing 3 wooden steps descending into pitch black. And from below, I heard movement, slow, heavy, wet. Not footsteps, something dragging, something with weight. And then the voice again, mine, louder this time, echoing off the stone. "You left me here. You're not supposed to leave." I backed away, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, though I knew it wouldn't help. I turned to run for the bedroom, but froze in the doorway. Someone was standing in the corner of the room, not facing me, just standing. Same height as me, same build, same clothes. I called out my own name, trying to break whatever hallucination this was, but the figure didn't move until I stepped closer. Then it tilted its head, not like a person, like a puppet on a string. It turned slowly, revealing my own face, drained of color, eyes black and 2 wide lips, pulled back in a grin that didn't belong to me. And it spoke with my voice. "I've been here longer than you. I'm more you than you are now." I turned to run and slammed into the hallway wall. The cabin layout had changed. Doors were gone, windows bricked up. And behind me, I heard a second set of footsteps following my own. Perfectly matched. I ran for the front door, but when I opened it, the forest was no longer trees. It was reflections. 100 versions of me standing between branches, smiling, watching, waiting. The cabin was no longer a place. It was a trap, a loop, a feeding ground. And I wasn't the guest anymore. I was the offering. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even remember collapsing, but I must have, because I woke up on the cabin floor with dirt on my palms and blood on my lip like I had bitten it in my sleep. The fireplace was cold again. The trap door closed. Everything looked still, almost normal. The windows were back, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the blinds, and the forest outside danced with morning light like nothing had ever happened. I thought maybe it had been a dream. A vivid, impossible nightmare brought on by stress and isolation. But when I stood up and turned toward the kitchen, the journal was there waiting. The page had turned again. This time it said only one thing: you're free to go. For now. I didn't need more encouragement. I bolted. This time the car started. The road had returned. The signal came back halfway down the mountain. I didn't stop driving until I hit a gas station 3 towns away and paid cash for a motel room just to be surrounded by people, even strangers. I thought I'd escaped. For a while, I convinced myself it was just a story the cabin had wanted me to live out. A sick, immersive nightmare. But that illusion shattered 3 days later. I was at home, finally back in my apartment, unpacking. I opened my bag, and there it was, buried beneath my clothes, wrapped in an old flannel I hadn't brought to the cabin. The journal. Its pages smelled like ash. I flipped through quickly, heart racing. Most of it was the same, until I got to the very back. The last page wasn't handwritten. It looked printed, neatly typed. It said, "The cabin let you go, but you're not the same." A copy stayed behind. It has your thoughts, your memories. It thinks it's you. And now it's hungry too. I slammed the book shut, heart pounding. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, bury it. But I couldn't. I was too afraid that if I did, I'd vanish too. Like I wasn't the original. Like I was the one it let walk out, while the real me stayed behind, screaming through the trapdoor. And now I see things. In the corner of mirrors. In reflections that lag just a second too long. In videos I don't remember recording, showing me doing things I swear I didn't do. My friends say I've changed. They say I talk softer now, smile less, that something in my eyes looks distant, hollow. They're right. Something followed me home. Or maybe I followed it. And sometimes in the dead silence of early morning, I swear I hear knocking. 3 soft raps from inside the walls, and I wonder which one of us is really still here. Story 7. I thought my roommate was just eccentric until he locked me in. I found the job on a forum that no longer exists. It was one of those threads that vanish minutes after you refresh, posted by a user with no profile picture, no history. The title was simple: caretaker needed, high pay, remote location, no questions. The description was just a set of coordinates, a list of supplies to bring, and one rule in bold: do not enter the tower between 2 and 3 a.m. That was it. No contact info, no interviews. But the pay listed was absurd, $5,000 a week, wired in advance. I had just lost my job, rent was overdue, and something about the whole thing called to me, like it had been waiting. So I replied. An hour later, I got a single message back with a one-way ticket, a door code, and a message: the forest will take you the rest of the way. The flight was uneventful, the drive long, and then I reached the trailhead. No signs, no paths, just endless trees. But true to the message, I didn't get lost. Something led me, call it instinct, call it the wrong kind of luck, until I saw it, the tower. Old, crumbling. At least 6 stories tall, its windows sealed with thick black panels, the walls covered in ivy, and something darker beneath. And somehow, even in the daylight, the whole place cast a shadow too long to make sense. I stepped inside. The air was colder, heavier, and when the door shut behind me on its own, I didn't turn around. I just whispered to myself, "You're getting paid," and kept walking. But the closer I got to midnight, the louder the tower seemed to breathe. The inside of the tower was surprisingly clean, almost unnaturally so. No dust, no cobwebs. Just cold stone floors, long wooden hallways, and narrow staircases that twisted at odd angles. Each level had a room with a bed, a desk, and a window that couldn't be opened. The furniture looked old, but untouched, like no one had ever sat on it. On the main floor, I found a generator humming quietly behind a locked metal grate. Next to it, a panel displayed a digital clock permanently set to military time. There were no switches, no instructions. Just a subtle ticking sound beneath the hum, like something mechanical was counting down. My job, according to the final line in the message, was simple: stay inside. Monitor noise levels, record changes in the structure. That was all. I didn't know what changes to expect, but the longer I stayed, the more I noticed how the tower shifted. On the second night, the staircase between the 3rd and 4th floors was shorter by 3 steps. I knew it. I had counted them the first night because the angle made me dizzy. On the 3rd night, the room on level 5 had a window where before there was only solid wall. And sometimes, just out of the corner of my eye, I'd see something moving in the reflection of the glass, too fast, too long-limbed to be mine. But when I turned, it was gone. I wrote everything down in the logbook they'd left on the 1st floor. Each entry started with the time and ended with a summary low hum from the west wall. Floor feels warmer than before. Reflection moved on its own. Clock skipped from 1:58 to 2:01 a.m. I didn't sleep much. The tower groaned at night. Metal pinged and settled like the bones of the place were stretching. But I stayed. The money hit my account every Sunday like promised. That alone kept me grounded. I didn't ask who was paying me. I didn't want to know. On the 5th night, I found a door on the 6th floor I hadn't noticed before. It was built into the far wall, no handle, no hinges. Just a smooth slab of dark wood with a faint outline that seemed to pulse ever so slightly when I got close. I reached out to touch it, but the moment my fingers neared a cold sting like static ran through my arm, and I pulled away. I wrote that down too. The logbook pages were filling up fast. That night, as I sat by the desk on floor 4 trying to eat a dry sandwich, I heard something for the first time. Not the creaking, not the breathing. A voice, faint, repeating, coming from behind the walls. It was my name, whispered over and over like the tower itself had decided it was time I paid attention. I froze mid-bite, the sandwich suddenly dry as dust in my mouth. My name echoed again, softer now, almost apologetic. It wasn't coming from one place. It moved, weaving through the walls like it was trying to find the quickest way into my head. I pressed my ear against the stone, hoping to hear more, to catch a full sentence, a phrase, anything. But all I heard was breathing. Deep, slow, almost synchronized with the creaking of the structure. I stepped back. The temperature in the room had dropped, and my breath now formed thin, misty clouds that curled unnaturally before vanishing. I wrote it all down. Even the fear. I tried to convince myself this was what I was paid for, strange occurrences, changes in the environment. That's why the money was so good. But when I turned to leave the room, the hallway wasn't the same. It had stretched. What was once 12 feet long now looked like it went on for 30 or 40 the far end, pulsing slightly like a mirage. I took one cautious step forward. The floor groaned beneath me, not wood, not stone, but something soft and warm. I stopped. A sound came from behind me, a dragging slow motion like bare feet across carpet. I spun around. Nothing there. The hallway looked normal again, but I could still feel the stretch in my chest, like I had almost been pulled into something I wasn't supposed to see. I ran back down to the first floor and checked the logbook. The most recent entry one I hadn't written was in different handwriting. Sharp, jagged lines. It read, "You're not logging, you're feeding it." I slammed the book shut and backed away. The generator behind the grate clicked loudly, and the digital clock glitched, numbers stuttering before jumping to 1:59 a.m. My stomach dropped. I wasn't supposed to be near the 6th floor between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m. That was the rule. But I wasn't on the 6th floor. I was on the 1st. I should have been safe. Then I noticed the ceiling above me had changed. It was higher, far too high for the tower's dimensions. Shadows now reached down from the rafters, moving against the grain of the flickering light. The structure was folding inward, or maybe stretching outward, I couldn't tell. Then came the noise. Not creaking, not whispers. A single low knock. From behind the wood panel door on the 6th floor, the one without hinges. I wasn't near it. But I could feel the knock in my chest, like it had vibrated through every wall in the tower at once. Then another knock. Closer. Not upstairs anymore. This one came from the stairs behind me. I turned just in time to see a shape moving, just a blur, but it had my face. Not exactly. Not anymore. It was longer, the proportions wrong. Like something had been trying to remember what I looked like and got most of the details right, but not all. I ran up the stairs even though every step felt like climbing into a mouth. I could hear the thing climbing two steps behind. My body knew something before my brain did. The tower wasn't haunted. It was alive, and it was starving. I didn't stop until I reached the 5th floor, lungs burning, throat dry, the air too thick to breathe. Behind me, the sound of footsteps slowed. Deliberate, patient. It wasn't chasing me like prey, it was herding me, guiding me. And then I realized where I was standing. Just outside the door to the 6th floor. The one with no hinges. The one that pulsed when I got too close. I turned to run, but the hallway behind me had collapsed into darkness. Not shadow. Absence. Like the tower had shut off a part of itself. The only way left was forward. The panel door in front of me now breathed with the rhythm of something sleeping or pretending to. I raised a hand slowly, instinct screaming to run, but logic gone. Curiosity outweighing fear. The surface of the door felt like skin. Cold, damp, alive. It opened before I could pull away, not with a swing. It peeled back layers, unfolding like flesh, revealing a staircase spiraling down into impossible dark. I stepped inside not because I wanted to, but because the tower was pulling me. The air thickened with every step downward. The walls grew narrower, tighter, until I had to duck, then crawl. And then suddenly, I was standing in a chamber. Massive. Far bigger than the structure should have allowed. In the center stood a mirror, floor to ceiling, smooth and rippling like black mercury. I stared. My reflection stared back. But it didn't move when I did. It just watched me. And then it smiled. a wide, crooked smile I couldn't physically make. It raised a hand. I didn't. It stepped forward. I didn't. And then it whispered in my voice, "You've been feeding me since day one." I stepped back, heart racing. All around the chamber, I saw them logbooks. Dozens, hundreds, piled like offerings, all different, all dated. Some centuries old, some dated next year. Some had my handwriting, some didn't. And that's when I saw the others. Dozens of reflections within the mirror, other versions of me watching silently, their faces stretched in despair or ecstasy. Trapped, repeating, waiting. The mirror pulsed. My doppelganger reached out from the glass, its hand-cold fingers threading into mine like water. I tried to pull away, but my arm didn't respond. I tried to scream, but the tower swallowed the sound. My body froze. My thoughts scattered. The last thing I saw was the logbook beside the mirrors open to a fresh page. The title at the top read, "Caretaker 074. Status ingested." The mirror snapped shut behind me, and far above the tower, breathed a little deeper. Fuller. Fed. I woke up in my apartment, or at least that's what it looked like. My bed, my sheets, my posters on the wall, everything exactly where it should be. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, fully charged. The sun was rising. Birds chirped outside the window. But something felt wrong, off. I sat up slowly, heart thudding. My skin felt tight, like it didn't fit right. My limbs moved, but sluggishly, like I was remembering how to use them. I stumbled to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and stared into the mirror. It was me. Same face, same eyes. But the smile looking back wasn't mine. It lingered a second too long. My reflection blinked just a beat too late. And then it was perfectly synced again. I laughed nervously at first, then louder, hysterical. But it didn't help. I was back, but something inside me wasn't. The logbook was in my bag, the same one from the tower. I didn't remember packing it, but there it was. New handwriting filled the latest pages, none of it mine. The entries detailed my every move since waking up from the moment I opened my eyes to brushing my teeth. The last line read, "Integration complete. He doesn't know." My chest tightened. I backed away from the desk, hands trembling. Outside, everything looked normal: cars, passing neighbors, walking dogs. But their faces were too smooth, their motions too perfect, too rehearsed. I walked to the kitchen. My coffee was already brewed, steam still rising, my favorite mug sitting ready. I hadn't made it. I didn't remember waking up to do anything. And then the knock came. 3 soft taps at the door. I froze, slowly stepped toward it, pressed my eye to the peephole. No one there, just hallway, empty. But as I turned to step back, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, my own silhouette. Not behind me, outside the window, staring in, not moving, not blinking, just watching. And when I blinked, it was gone. But the logbook on the table had a new entry: host unstable. Replacement required. Begin transfer. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't move. My arms stayed at my sides, my legs locked. And in the reflection of the window, I saw the other me smile. Wider now, triumphant. And then I heard the voice again inside my head this time. Calm, familiar. You brought it home. And that's when I knew I never left the tower. I was still in it. Or worse, it was now inside me. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.